so good to see you all here on this wet, windy, cold, wintry December night. Thank you all for coming all the way over here to Café Utopie and for joining this event. My name's Janet Anderson. I'm moderating this event for this evening, seeing us all through. And again, thank you for coming along to join this. It is an event called Ukraine, Justice in Times of War, which I think is quite self-explanatory, except that we are focusing very, very specifically on the justice that is happening inside Ukraine itself, rather than the justice that is being practiced here in The Hague. So we're going to get a very different perspective, I hope. The last time I was here, I think was it 3 years ago, Nicolas, that we had the last event for Fondation Hirondelle, and that was about climate justice. And I've always had that sense with these Hirondelle events that they are really on the money. They're on the subject that we all really want to discuss. So again, congratulations for having put together a really interesting panel. Very much Thierry Cruvelier, who's also joined us on the panel, but these are your ideas of who should take part and the interesting people that we need to ask questions of. So thank you to our two additional panelists from Ukraine itself and our translator, who are going to help us understand what is going on in terms of justice in times of war. So, tiny bit of context from me. And I've really kind of taken this from the way that we've put the event together, that this is the first time that we have seen this kind of justice happening so quickly during a conflict. I mean, in Ukraine itself, the court started working on trying crimes to do with the invasion, which was in February. They started in May with some trials. So that's only 3 months in. It's unprecedented, and it causes us a lot of questions. How does that work? What is the reality behind it? It also causes a major challenge for us in the media as to how we cover it, that we'll be discussing as well. So that's kind of the sub-theme for this event. We have 3 panelists here, and to start with we will have, and I'll just give them all a brief introduction and then set us all going. We have, and I have not practiced people's surnames, so I do apologize if I mangle them, and I should have practiced them better. We have Anna Mykytenko. Is that correct? Thank you. Senior Advisor and Country Manager at Global Rights Compliance, GRC, in Ukraine. We have Iryna Salii, who is the founder and the editor-in-chief of Sudovyi Reporter, and Thierry Cruvelier, who is editor-in-chief of justiceinfo.net. And I've asked all 3 to, if they can possibly frame what they want to say in terms of what has changed since the end of February, because you've all been doing all of the jobs that you do for long periods, but what's the big differences that you can see? When I asked Anna whether she could do this, she said, how long have I got? 2 hours? I said, we've only got 10 minutes to start with. So let's see how far we get with that framing. And then once each 3 of them have had something to say, then I'll be asking us all to join in and ask some questions ourselves. Okay? Great. Anna, please take the mic and over to you.
Thank you. And I promise I will not take 2 hours. I think the one-word answer to the question is what changed is attitudes, because we've been the global rights compliance in Ukraine since 2015. And it's only after February 2022 that we noticed this massive shift in attitudes of investigators, of prosecutors, of judges, of the public more generally. before we had two regional war crimes units in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and we had a war crimes department in the Office of the Prosecutor General, and they were all struggling to handle war-related investigations, whether these are war crimes investigations or state treason or other related crimes. And they only started thinking about having a strategy, I think, in 2020. Which is, let's say, it took them a long time. And then the full-scale invasion happened, and suddenly all these professionals who had to move themselves to the relative safety of Western Ukraine, who had to evacuate their families, on top of all that war-related stress, they very quickly realized that they do need some approach to the massive investigations they got. And they did gather all the efforts in preparing the strategy, in asking us to assist with the strategy, and they've got one, remarkably. I mean, it's still work in progress, but that's really something big that happened in the past 9 months that didn't happen in the previous 8 years. And I think it's fair to say that everyone within the justice system realizes that the main burden of investigations and prosecutions and adjudication will be with the Ukrainian system, because however many promises the international community makes and however many promises the ICC might make, the most of the 50,000 of war crimes investigations registered by now, the most of them will be within Ukraine, and it's up to the Ukrainian professionals to work on it. And that's the understanding of this also changed. I mean, I think it's fairly soon that all the Ukrainian stakeholders realize that they have to make an effort. They can't just wait for the ICC to come in and do some kind of miracle. They can't wait for the JIT to come in and take the universal jurisdiction cases or any other cases. And that the understanding led to many protocols being created, or at least the requests being sent out to help with creation of protocols, guidelines, training of investigators and prosecutors, capacity building, and we see this willingness to learn. We see the increasing efforts to change the approaches, which, trust me, is not easy to change when you've been doing something for 30 years or even 8 years of the conflict. It's not an easy change, but it's happening. What we observe through the communications with the prosecutors and investigators and through the work of our mobile justice teams is that within this 9 months, there is a shift from direct perpetrator cases to low to mid-level to high-level commanders cases, from simple single incident investigations to more complex cases. And that's a really important change. This is something that will hopefully allow Ukraine to ensure that justice for war crimes is achieved. If not now, then at least in the future. And that change is really remarkable. And I think a few people here know that I used to criticize the prosecution a lot. And that's also a change that I don't anymore, because the efforts that the Office of the Prosecutor General is making, it's an incredible effort, and it's really a model of how justice can and should be done locally. And of course, it's not an ideal situation, and I'm not saying that everyone is perfect and the system is perfect, but the system is quickly moving to, well, not being perfect, but being significantly improved in comparison to what it used to be before the February invasion.
are working for one of these organizations that is maybe bringing in a lot of foreign expertise to help with all of this capacity building that you're talking about and this developing of protocols, etc., how are the foreigners fitting in?
Well, I think by this point we are not exactly a foreign organization. We've been in Ukraine for a long time, and our teams are comprised of the internationals and nationals. So it's a mixture, and we are trying to bring in people who don't make big promises. We are bringing in people who come and do the work, whether it's accompanying the investigative and prosecutorial teams in the field, or really designing and creation of protocols or guidelines. And I think well, I'm going to be very optimistic about the team, but we have incredible people on the ground, and one of them is actually here. And that's the best part of our team. And I think it's a unique feature that people are actually trying to bring in tailored approaches and not just copy and paste something that the ICC has into the Ukrainian practices, or not just impose the international standards or best practices on Ukraine, but analyze the situation, analyze the facts on the ground, and then come up with the tailored solutions. And that's, I think, what Ukraine really needs, not just because I work for this organization, but objectively speaking, Ukraine, like any other country at war, does not really need to be told what the international standards are. It needs help in implementing the standards in that very specific situation that we are in. And to that end, I think the international efforts should be focused on not imposing, but coming up with the specific solutions.
Great, thank you very much. Could you hand your mic over to Iryna, and Thierry, can you give the other mic, please, to Valeria? Thank you. So our next speaker is Iryna Salii, the editor-in-chief at Sudovyi Reporter, and this is a space where there are a number of journalists who you are working with, I understand, Iryna, who are following as many, maybe even all of the cases that you can. So my question again to you is, how have things changed for you since the end of February? And we may be doing a bit of not simultaneous, but sequential translation here, so just give us a bit of space to do that.
Before the invasion, I worked in justice journalism for nearly 5 years, and honestly, it's the first time I just work with war crimes trials. Of course, from 2014 we had a conflict in Donbass, but it wasn't an official war. We also had some terrorism trials. We had some trials on combatants, but it wasn't classic war crimes. So this conflict in Donbass, it wasn't like a particular interest of most of Ukrainian society, honestly. It wasn't an official war, and most of people, if you have such a chance, if you can live in Kiev or in Lviv or in some other parts of Ukraine, and you live your normal life, you can do your business or something else, you are not very particularly interested about Donbass. You just prefer to ignore it, to forget this, something unpleasant is just in the moment. So for many years it wasn't like a particular interest. And now on 24th of February, the war just came to every house. And it was it was a an experience for everybody. I think that there is nearly no one person in Ukraine that don't have this experience. So everybody, more or less, they listened to some shellings. They have maybe somebody from your family is in the army. We have judges that were in the territorial defense or even in the army. They were not professional combatants, but they went to the army. We have judges whose sons are in the army. We have prosecutors in the army that left their jobs and went to the army. So it's such a specific that everybody are the participants. In most cases, when you are just covering trials, you are not a participant of the story. This is the story of another man, and you can't understand all the experience, all this pain, all this tragedy. And it's also like a rule that you should have this distance. Because if, for example, judge has its personal interest in this case, this is, in Ukraine, this is a reason to change the judge. And also from journalists, we expect the journalist should be very objective. It should he or she should also have this distance to be honest with everybody. But now we all are participants of this story, of this conflict, and the conflict is not over. We don't have the official winner. We don't have the final result. The war is still going on, and it's such a unique situation when we should think a lot, not only about standards, about how to cover these stories, but we also, for me as a journalist, I should also care about the security of people that are in this trial. Before the invasion, I was covering more like high corruption trials, high corruption cases. And the specific is, in these cases, when you're talking about high officials, usually we understand that these people, they have, less rights for some private. We understand that they are public, and you have more right to criticize them. You have the right to tell the name of these people and so on. And now, during the war, we have in our trials, we have, but it's most about small people. Even soldiers, we have small. We have this low level, no commanders, only usual soldiers, and we also have a great amount of war-related trials, war-related crimes. It's treason, it's collaboration, and it's the part of trials when we have our Ukrainian citizens accused. So we have two parts. In one case, we have the Russian soldiers, and we have war crimes. And another part is the crimes that are committed by Ukrainian citizens that supported Russians during the occupation. And mainly these are small people. They are not public, they are not famous. And we also have victims that also are not ready for this to be public. That journalist would make a film or a photo of them, and I had such a case when the family of victim just told me that please do not publish a photo. Hide our faces because the war is not over. Of course, we all are optimists, and we believe it would be okay. That the territories that are free now, that are occupied, they won't be reoccupied again. But people still remember about security, and they try to be accurate with all this.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you for managing to speak in English. I'm sure we all really appreciate it. So I understand these issues that you're talking about of ethics. I was just wondering for myself, one of the practical questions: how easy is it as a journalist to get access to knowing when the trials are happening, even to get access to the files that the prosecutor is preparing and so on? Is it, I imagine in times of war it is not easy, but maybe they are also very cooperative with you?
In fact, in Ukraine we had and we still have a lot of open information about work of courts. We have public schedules where you can find information about the next hearings. But now, during the war, we have such a new trend to hide information. We still have public schedules, but more and more information is becomes not public. And our court administration, our court administration officially declared that they are going to hide more information, first and foremost personal data of judges, of prosecutors, of lawyers, of people that are involved in this trial. But still I use public information from the court websites. Also, mainly it's public information. Also, you can talk to lawyers if you know somebody and they are friendly and they would like to share information. You can ask them. I can say that our first trials, first and foremost, Shishamarin, it was very public. It was nearly 200 journalists in the court at the same time, and the court was too small. They did not have enough space. The usual room where the judge works, it was very small. It was impossible. So they just changed the building to organize the process. The next maybe 2 trials were also more or less public. The prosecutor's office was talking about them. They published some information, and the rest trials they were not public. I can't say that they were closed. They were not closed. We have such a rule, such a law that the court hearings are public. They are open for everybody to come and to see and listen. But there were nobody published information and told you just come and see. Only if you are particularly interested and you know that there is a court schedule and you check that information, you find the information and you go by yourself. So, and in that courts, of course, there were very few journalists, nearly nobody except me. So I can't say it's difficult. Some difficult, it's because of the organization of this court process, especially today when if you don't have electricity, the court is cancelled, because we need electricity to record everything on video, audio recording. So if, for example, the lawyer is absent, we don't have a hearing, because even in absentia, every accused should have a lawyer. Many different reasons. It's such a human factor when it could be cancelled. Also, it's about we have these courts and we have these trials in different regions, not only in Kiev. Shishamarin, it was the first, and it was in Kiev. It was well organized, and now we have trials in very small towns with no normal transport connection, with no service, very poor infrastructure, and this is it's also exotic, and it makes some difficulty to go there. To find that court and to organize your work there, because probably there won't be any hotel there and you would have some difficulties with transport to go there. But it's made, because this is the closest court to the place where the crime was committed, where the victims or witnesses live. So that's why we have this court and not another.
Great, thank you very much. Maybe you could hand the mic over? Yeah. So now we turn to Thierry, the editor-in-chief of justiceinfo.net. And I was just wondering how you might be answering the question, how have things changed? Because I was thinking about writing for Justice Info. The last time that I had the word Ukraine in one of my stories before this happened was when Ben Suda, the last prosecutor of the ICC, said, sorry, we don't have enough money to commence this investigation. And so what do? Nothing. So I don't think I've ever written about Ukraine until recently. So tell us, how have things changed for you?
Well, it changed completely because there was barely any coverage of Ukraine before the full invasion. It's not that, as Iryna reminded, as you all said, the war was already on in Donbass, in Crimea. The issue of war crimes in Ukraine was already there, but there wasn't much happening in the national criminal system. And so as a result, I remember that we actually didn't really have a correspondent for Justice Info in Ukraine. As it happened, I said, Frank, who is running the website with me, we have been lucky enough to go and work in Ukraine, which is how we met Iryna and Anna before the full invasion between 2018 and 2020. So we were regularly going, but we had really no reporting to do for Justice Info much. And so that completely changed all of a sudden. And it changed in a way that was even very different than what we do in other countries where we have a correspondent, but we have one. And he or she covers the particular country and the particular situation. And here, it was impossible to have only one correspondent because, as you said, the trials took place very quickly, but they also spread through the country. And so one correspondent could not possibly be at the right place at the right moment. And so that's when we were lucky enough that we knew already Iryna. We had been working with Iryna and Sergei, who is not here, but who is another of the coordinators. And we already Iryna could already have a network of local reporters based in different parts of the country who had been used to cover justice issues. And so very quickly we could reorganize that network, but now focusing on war crimes, which was indeed not at all their interest before. So they all turned from court reporters, classic court reporters, they all turned into war crimes court reporters. But that was possible only because we had that network before. But it was also necessary to do it this way because we needed reporters based in different parts of the country so that they were able to move to a location rather quickly and so that we could cover as many cases as possible. So it's a completely different format than what we are used to do. We are actually working, Iryna is the main coordinator of this network of reporters. She sends them, she knows where to send the other reporters, but we're basically working with that whole group. And what we're doing is we're supporting their production locally, but they produce much more than what we publish at Justice Info. So part of their production is only for Ukraine, and we picked some of the stories because we can't just cover only Ukraine at Justice Info, even though to give you an idea of the change. So from almost no coverage of the Ukraine story, since February, it represents about 30% of our publication. So it's a massive change, and it's very rare that a story takes so much space on the website. I can think about the Truth Commission in the Gambia, took a lot of space. We covered it, extensively, and it was an amazing process. But it's very rare that one story takes 30%. But it also makes sense because, as we said, it's a very unique event. Now, the other challenge was, I think Iryna already said how it's moving all the time. The process is constantly changing. It seems like every couple of months we have a new issue. We started, of course, with the Russian soldiers being tried, and we thought, okay, this is going to be war crimes justice in Ukraine. No, there haven't been so many of these cases, actually. We just published today a map of these trials, and you'll see that there aren't many such cases. I think it's 6 soldiers, Russian soldiers, who've been tried. And so gradually we realized that the whole exchange of prisoners strategy of Ukrainian authorities actually deprived the system from having commanders, because the commanders have value, so they were exchanged and they wouldn't be tried, and it's only the lower level guys who would be tried and possibly exchanged afterwards, by the way. So all these realities of the war and the politics of the war just changed the dynamics. And then all of a sudden we realized that we had all these collaboration trials. And to me, of course, they're not war crimes as such, but they're clearly war-related, and officially, like they're national security trials. And to me, and that's where courts and justice is so interesting, they're not, to me, they're absolutely not minor stories, because they tell the story of the occupation. It's through these trials, through these cases, you have a whole story of the war that is being written in court, and we know that. We know the power of court cases to actually tell the life of people during the war. And that's why when we say the small people, to me, the small people's narratives that we have in these courts are also the big story of war, of the daily life during the war. I remember a story that Iryna, we published it, I can't remember, 2 or 3 months ago. It was a trial in absentia. So another evolution. At some point, we had these trials of Russian soldiers who were not there. They were in Russia, which was a bit tricky. And it's always complicated because the evidence looks weak. And I really, when I read the report, I was like, damn, this is weak. This is a weak case, and it's not going to help the Ukrainian judiciary to look good and to look serious about running war crimes cases. Because the story that witnesses were saying, the victims, they were weird, they were awkward. They were telling us stories about, Russian soldiers running after chicken, and it seems to be dramatic. And you just wonder what was the story. And since there was no accused, we wouldn't have, another narrative. A couple of weeks later, the New York Times published an amazing, huge report. They took 2 months to listen to tapes of conversations on the phone by Russian soldiers that they were actually listened to by Ukrainian intelligence services. The New York Times got access to these dozens of phone calls from Russian soldiers to their friends and families during the war. And in some of them, there was exactly the story, including the chicken story, told by the Russian soldiers to their friends and families, and telling them, look, this is what we're doing in those telephone calls. And so all of a sudden it's like, so the evidence may not have been that weak. It was just the weird story of war under occupation in a small, neighborhood or village. So to me, that's also the value of all these trials. The small people trial, it's actually a whole story of the war is being written in these local courts, and I think it's fantastic that we have this group of reporters there to, tell us these stories, which is the reality of Ukrainians.
Is there an area that the journalists that you're working with are finding difficult to report on? I mean, all armies commit war crimes, and presumably the Ukrainian army has committed some war crimes in some places. Is that something that is difficult to get Ukrainian journalists to even consider thinking about reporting on?
It's sensitive, and I'm sure we'll hear Iryna also say what she thinks. But my experience of it is that, yes, that was an issue rather early, not too early in the process, but rather early. And when we met in July, when we met in Kyiv, we actually, the whole group, so the 8 reporters covering the trials, we did address that. And I was impressed how, I think pretty much all of them were clear that it would be part of their work to also cover potential war crimes committed by their own armed forces. It was also clear to me that they said, yes, we know it's going to be our duty, it's going to be our work. And some of them were more, you could tell that they were more ready to go for it, and others not so much. But they all had a clear sense that it was the responsibility of reporters. Now, were they ready to cover the few, and actually, up until today, I only know about 2 clear cases of alleged war crimes committed by Ukrainian army, and they were very well documented, including by the New York Times, with videos of a group of Russian soldiers executed on the road, prisoners, and another group of prisoners being shot in the leg by Ukrainian soldiers. Pretty clearly documented stuff, good stuff, serious investigation, and so, but yes, I think Ukrainian reporters were not so super ready to work on this so much. Now, to be fair, there is no case. The national judiciary has not opened a case, or at least not officially, not that we know, maybe Anna knows, but we don't know. Like, there's no official trial on against Ukrainian soldiers on these 2 particular incidents. So in a sense, they don't have to report on them. But you're right that we had an agreement then, which was like, this is for us to write about. So we write about these more sensitive issues for the time being, until it becomes a clear reality for Ukrainian reporters to have to write about it themselves. We are doing it from where we are, which is much easier for us to do. Yeah, so that's the deal so far.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it to the floor in a moment. Just to warn you that we are recording this event, so if you would prefer your question not to be recorded, or yourself not to be recorded at all, then just let us know and we'll make sure that we scrub you out. I mean, not that we're putting the whole event online, it's just for the highlights reel, but just let us know so that in case you're uncomfortable with that. But before I open it up to you, I want to ask any of you would like to say anything in response to each other or ask any questions to each other. Is there anything that yeah, please go ahead, grab the mic.
Just a really quick one. There are no trials into the Ukrainian side, but there are investigations. I'm not entirely sure at which stage they are, but to my knowledge, there are 3 of them. The 2 that you mentioned, there is another one also to do with prisoners of war, and there might be another one, the most recent, into the one that arguably looks like a treacherous killing, but might not be. So there are investigations which just didn't make it to courts yet.
Do you want to add anything or say anything? Or Thierry, did you have anything you wanted to add or ask questions of your colleagues before I let everybody else in? Please.
Well, it's always tempting when you have new information. You say, I heard Anna say that we should expect now more higher level cases and more complex cases, and that's news to me. I didn't know. So what is it? And is it, no, I'm not saying I don't, I'm not expecting it. Say, all right. The question is it related to the change of prosecutor general prosecutor that happened last summer. And do you have a sense that between the removal of the first general prosecutor and now, there has been a clear reassessment of the prosecution strategy? Is that the situation, and is that would explain why we should expect different kind of cases today?
So 3 questions in one.
Yes.
I think I forgot the first 2 by now, but well, when I say that we should expect the high-level cases, I don't mean as in expect tomorrow. I mean that we are seeing a change in the approach. So we are seeing the willingness to build high-level cases and build complex cases, not necessarily that willingness transformed into actually building complex investigations at the moment, but it's very clear that investigation and prosecution are on the way to doing so, and that might or might not transform into trials in the next year, maybe next 2 years. And as regards the change of the leadership, I think we've seen since the beginning of our projects, we've seen about 5 prosecutors general. And it's always quite difficult to see the immediate change. So, you know, when the leadership goes, the people who actually do the work, they usually stay. And that's why you rarely connect the change of a person on top of the system with the changes within the system. I don't think there was a reassessment necessarily. Maybe there was, but I wouldn't know about it. But I think there was fairly quick understanding of what's needed, and this is definitely needed. And I think when the count of cases approached 50,000, they just realized that it cannot go any further with this. And that explains the approach, new, so to say, approach to war crimes investigations. But it's not sudden. This is something that's been prepared for a long time now, even if only in minds of people who work within the system. But yeah, again, just to summarize, I don't think it's necessarily directly connected with the new prosecutor general, but I think he's driving the change further, i.e. he's clearly showing that he supports the new ideas that might come from within the system, and he clearly delivers the message that he is after the war criminals and that the prosecutor general's office will have this complex approach and that there will be trials and that they will do their best, which I think is really important.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm coming among you with a microphone. Who would like to ask Reid Brody to start with?
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I was going to, just following up on Thierry's question, because that is new information. But I wonder if you could speak to 2 questions. One is the strategy of taking certain cases first. Like, I mean, from the outside, I mean, the Shishi Marine case seemed to be very, very weak. It looked like, and the next. So the Shishi Marine case was apparently this case of a soldier who was shot out, who was in a car and was told by somebody else in the car to shoot at a civilian or somebody, and he shot at that person. And he was sentenced to life imprisonment, which was lowered on appeal. The second case, which to me from the outside seemed even weaker, was a case of 2 soldiers who were shooting rockets from where they couldn't see. I mean, I know ballistically that they had no idea where the rockets were going to land, and they landed on civilian targets, and they were convicted of war crimes. I mean, what is, and from somebody who really admires the decision of the Ukrainian people to use the law and to show that, to take these 2 cases, it just seemed to, eviscerate that credibility. So that's my first one. Why these cases? Why not take a case that was really strong, a case maybe of sexual violence, or a case where you had the perpetrator on video or something like that?
Can I promise to come back to you for the second one, Reid?
Okay.
Yeah. Because I want to make sure we get a range of questions. And just remember, Anna isn't representing the Office of the Prosecutor. But it's a good question. Come on, could we have some more questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I work with the environmental movement in Ukraine to document the ecological damage resulting from the war and the invasion, etc. But the question is, right now, there is a 42 ICC member team to investigate war crimes at the moment. And I think you were saying that you give more emphasis to your own investigations than to wait for the ICC miracles. I think you used that word. But still, the ICC is there with 42 people, investigating war crimes. Is there any interaction between the journalists and this team, or are they keeping their cards close to the chest, which I think they are? I am at the Assembly of State Parties of the Criminal Court right now, these days, but of course I wanted to be here as well. And the people from the court, they don't say what they exactly are investigating. They just are not communicating what they are doing. They are supposed to also investigate environmental damage as part of the war crimes. They don't say anything about it. So I was wondering, how that interaction takes place in practice.
Thank you. Do we have a third question from the room back here? Sorry, I didn't catch your name, sir. I didn't catch your name, sir.
Wouter Vening.
Wouter Vening. And here from Mark Heston.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much. That was really thoughtful, and thanks to Thierry and Jana for putting this on. Obviously, the first question was kind of what's changed, and one of the big things is this East versus West narrative. And my heritage is Polish, and I find this fascinating because I'm Polish when the Russians, I'm Western when the Russians are involved, and then I'm not ever Western enough for other reasons, right? And I think Ukrainians feel this a little bit too, is we're Western when it serves the purposes of other states, and when it doesn't, we're not quite Western enough. But I wonder, in relation to that, there's something unique about Eastern Europe, in the sense that Eastern Europe has unfortunately been the playground of imperialist powers in the past, the Soviet Union, Germany, etc. There is a history that's separate from the West and distinctly different than the West. And so in relation to international justice in Ukraine, is there an allyship with states, non-aligned states, states beyond Europe, states in the global south? Are there conversations? I know Kuleba went to Africa to try and dispel notions, propaganda from Russia. Perhaps he was also talking about justice in the country and the need to have kind of at least rhetorical and political support beyond just Western Europe and North America. And does that resonate? Are there ways, are there avenues in which to get support from other parts of the world, other than, again, this framing of East versus West? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take those as the first three questions. Having a little bit of brief translation going on. So, why these trials, and environmental crimes and interaction with the Office of the Prosecutor, and then maybe is there another framing beyond East versus West for Ukraine? Would you like to answer any of that, Anna?
Let me try and speak about trials, and it will sound probably terribly defensive or terribly protective of the Office of the Prosecutor General, but look, with these first trials, they might not seem impressive on the outside, and, well, truth is they weren't, but take into consideration that these are the first trials. i.e. these are the investigations that took place in March, April this year, and the cases went to court by May, and this is all under the terrible pressure of the ongoing hostilities, but also the pressure from the public on the prosecution and on the judiciary to be up to the same standard that the military is. I'm not joking, I've heard this very explanation many times from the justice actors, that they feel like they're not meeting the high standards set by the army. And they were desperate to do something. And so, of course, all efforts start with these small steps. And Shishimarin case is a small step. It's not really as bad as it's been described in the media, and this is, of course, not the fault of the media. This is a bad communication strategy on the prosecution side. But when you look at the Shishimarin case from the legal perspective, or from the perspective of someone who's seen the case file, the criticism is quite unfair, because yes, this trial was criticized for selecting the wrong accused, which is not true because he did pull the trigger, and then for him implementing orders of his superior, which is again not true because the other man in the car was not his superior and the order was manifestly unlawful anyway. And then, of course, the prisoner swap, which gave back to Russia the other people in the car and did not give the Shishimarin himself, which again is not exactly fair criticism, because prosecution is free to choose whom to prosecute. And in this case, it did go after the direct perpetrator, but there is nothing wrong with that. And other people in the car did not commit a crime. So, well, yes, there was a decision to do a prisoner swap. Okay, that happened. There might be another one involving Shishimarin, unless he was already exchanged, which I don't really know. So yes, this is a simple case. Yes, this is a direct perpetrator case, but this is also a first war crimes trial. So I don't think it would have been fair to expect much of it. And I think it was quite representative of the criminality that also took place or is still taking place when these soldiers commit crimes against random civilians, not just with rockets and missiles, but also with being on the ground and really pulling the trigger. And the other trial, I don't think it's the same, i.e. it's unfair criticism, that one might be weaker. But again, these are the first cases, and we are just moving to something more complex and more sophisticated. And the bottom line is give the investigators and prosecutors some time, and I promise you they're moving in the right direction.
First trials, I can say that maybe they are also important for Ukrainian society, not only as something legal, but also from symbolic point of view. This is important for people to see that something happens and that we have some decision that this is a crime, that somebody is punished. And the other thing that is all these Russian soldiers that were tried, they were nearly all, most of them were exchanged. And now we have official information because the court decisions about the exchangement were published. For many of them, that they are officially exchanged. And you know, we also had some small cases, such unserious cases, when, for example, a Russian soldier stole the golden chain during the occupation. And this soldier was arrested. His commanders, they were lucky to leave this territory, but this soldier that stole the golden chain, he was arrested. And he was tried for war crime because stealing this chain. And he was sentenced to 8 years and a half in prison for this chain. And then he was exchanged. We don't know how many people were exchanged. We don't know the equivalent. But we understand that this justice was also justice for exchangement. That we have a Russian soldier, and we would, with the verdict, and we are ready to exchange him to some of our people. And I think that many people would agree that this chain is not so important, and that we would agree to exchange him. He hasn't killed anyone, and we would agree to exchange him. This is not a big discussion in Ukrainian society. Of course, it also makes such an impression that this is not serious for people. But there is also such point of view that this is important to fix crimes, even if they are in absentia. We fix them, that this is a crime. We fix evidences, we fix some testimonies of people. Because, people's memory is not perfect. People can forget something. And if we would have these trials in 10 or 20 years after these events, many would be forgotten. People could die, people would leave this territory, and it would be difficult to find witnesses. The evidences disappear. So it's important to fix this, all this massive, what has happened. Also for some reparations, for some refunding of this damage. So
Thierry, have you got something to say on the presence of the Office of the Prosecutor, or on have you seen anything about environmental crimes?
No, and I find the question about covering the investigations of the ICC interesting, because we haven't done anything. It's at this moment, I think that none of the Ukrainian reporters have access to the foreign investigators. They're doing their work very discreetly or very protected from any contact with anyone. And so, at this point, I think that I don't think I can ask any of you guys to have access to ICC investigators on the ground. Would we, if we went, like Frank or I or Janet, would we have more access because we have our own network among these circles? I'm not so sure. Would we be allowed to be embedded in one of their investigative team? I'm not so sure. And again, I mean, the record of the ICC in terms of investigations is so poor at this stage that I'm not sure even what they're actually doing. So I hope they're doing their work. It's very impressive, the number of investigators they claim to have. Let's see what they come up with. But it's true that we are not covering their investigative work. No particular direct access, which is interesting. Maybe we should push for it, but difficult. I have a different take, I think, on the I don't consider these first trials as a shame, in a sense that they're not serious. I think they are serious. I mean, the Shishimarin case, it's a civilian who is killed, and I find that serious. And in all those cases, the accused agreed. I mean, admitted. What about the other case, the one in Yeah. So I agree. It's a very light case. It's not irrelevant to me. It's just very is this the most serious case you have to bring? Then I agree with you. Like, wow, this is not a big case. But in a way, what is could be.
I don't know if everybody can hear what you're saying, Reid.
Yeah,
He says, Reid said it's not a war crime, not even killing civilians.
No, I mean,
Okay.
in that case, the case of the two soldiers, I don't see any intent to kill civilians.
So intent to kill civilians.
Okay, well, let's not argue about this. I think that one of the main another thing was the way the process was organized. Was it fair? Was it not? Would the defense have, a say? In the Shishimarin case, I was actually very much watching this. And in my view, the questions of the defense lawyers were all the questions that the defense lawyer would ask in terms of trying to build a classic defense on duress and all these classic strategies of the defense. So I was like, okay. The lawyer put the questions that any defense lawyer would put, and it's a guilty plea, kind of, so, you don't go too far. So I didn't find that particularly, I didn't look at it as a bad trial or as a poor process. The sentencing was for me like a big issue.
Because it was excessive?
In every case, in all the first trials, it's the maximum sentence that was given, regardless of basically of the situation of the particular accused. You really felt like all mitigating circumstances were just put aside. So that was a problem, and the fact that it was corrected under appeal showed that there was, I guess, a lot of pressure and a bit of outrage. Like, you can't do that. On a guilty plea, on such a small guy, you can't give him life. But so that's an issue. Like, so far, sentencing is pretty harsh. It's very much maximum punishment. But again, in times of war, would it be different in any other country that I know of? I don't think so. I think, to me, it's the reality of justice in times of war. Harsh. It's harsh. In a way, at the international level, as you know, all the first cases also got, maximum punishment, and years later, it would be much more lenient. It's a classic. The first ones to be tried get it all. They're symbolic, and they're going to be punished as hard as it gets. If you're tried in 2 years, in 5 years, you're going to have a different deal. It's a classic, not specific to Ukraine, in my view.
And I think your question, Mark, will be putting to drinks afterwards. So I will come back to you, Reid. Philippe.
Thank you. It's fascinating, really, what you're explaining. Philip Grant from Trial International. 2 quick questions. The first one, I'm also learning tonight that there's a new strategy, a new approach, at least trying to aim mid to high level perpetrators. In maybe a year or 2 years' time, there might be trials. Is that strategy accompanied by a parallel strategy to go for in absentia trials, or can we expect the defendants to be present that moment at the trial? And second quick question is the judicial backlash of these trials from the other side, occupational authorities or the Russian side. Do you see a direct link between these trials taking place and the other side trying for domestic consumption to build a narrative that Ukrainians have been committed war crimes? We've seen trials of foreign fighters, and I think others have been announced as well. Do you see a link between the two?
And the second question, just for my understanding, are you talking about trials in the Ukrainian occupied territories or trials in Russia?
Well, I'm wondering, it's an open question, I'm not sure exactly who's in charge, but from at least the other side.
Okay. And another question? Yeah.
Gonzague Dupas, Lawyers Without Borders, Canada. I'm curious to know, because we've discussed a lot about the judiciary, but I'd like to know whether there are other mechanisms of transitional justice that are setting, or if there is a will from the Ukrainian authorities to to put a strategy in terms of reparations, or if they are exploring ways to uncover the truth from other perspectives, such as a truth commission or something like that. Is that something that is on the table right now?
Thank you. And Reid, I promised you a second go. So.
Yeah, no, I guess you've raised this, but the question was really about the ICC. I mean, do you have any understanding of the division of labor between the Ukrainian prosecutors and the ICC? I mean, in principle, the Ukrainian prosecutors, Ukraine is willing and able. There's actually no specific reason why any of this should go to the ICC, except for maybe Vladimir Putin. Presumably, and one speculates that the ICC, which has never convicted anybody, any state official anywhere in the world, would like to get their hands on some soldiers so that they can get their first convictions. But do you have any idea of how this is playing out?
Great, thank you. So plenty of questions to get into. Who wants to start again? Do you want to start again? No? You've got the mic.
Sorry, can you remind me just the first question, please? Oh, yeah. Let me just get back to the strategy. This, to be very clear, this is the work in progress, i.e. there is no paper at the moment that actually says war crime strategy, apart from the few drafts that are being circulated by the various actors who support the Office of the Prosecutor General, and it's up to the office to decide which parts of which proposals it will or will not take. And they are, as far as I know, aiming to come up with the strategy by the end of this year, which to me seems as a very ambitious goal, so maybe a few months' time. That's as regards the war crime strategy. There is a separate one that concerns sexual violence, so conflict-related sexual violence crimes, and that one is actually a paper, so not to be confused. And then as regards trials in absentia, from what I know, there is some kind of a change in the sense that some prosecutors think that to have a trial in absentia or not to have a trial in absentia should largely be up to victims. So they should have a right to choose whether they want to have a judgment that says that this person is guilty of this crime, or whether they would go for another kind of proof maybe that a crime was committed. That probably does not concern all crimes, but at least this is an idea that I've heard from prosecution. And for the mid to high level perpetrators, I think there might be some trials in absentia, symbolically maybe, but I'm just guessing here now. It's not that I have a clear answer that I've heard from someone. And then as regards the Truth Commission, I haven't heard the idea of it being expressed. There are some reparation mechanism ideas, I would call it. I think there is a draft law that's been submitted to the parliament that relates specifically to reparations in sexual violence cases, but that's just a draft law and it's a very long way from being even heard, not just adopted, even heard by the parliament. There is a talk of creating a tribunal for the crime of aggression, but I'm sure that's not the question you're asking, so let me just leave it there.
Anything on reprisal trials? Are you seeing things happening in other jurisdictions, occupied territories, or in Russia kind of in response?
That's an interesting one because clearly we also the attempt to put the Azov fighters or Mariupol defenders on trial, which was not completed for some reason. Apart from that, I don't think I've heard of systematic trials, at least in response to the Ukrainian trials. What I've heard from even before the full-scale invasion was this Russian practice of issuing notices of suspicion to Ukrainian investigators and prosecutors who investigate and prosecute crimes by the Russians. So they used to create criminal cases basically against people who were trying to achieve justice for the Russian crimes in Ukraine. But again, this is before the full-scale invasion, and I'm not entirely sure this is still the case.
I'll come back to you maybe on the ICC, but maybe you want to add in anything that you would like to say on whether there are talks of any other mechanisms for transitional justice, like reparations or discussions. No, it's not. No? Okay. Thierry?
Something, I don't know if you're switching, but something I'd like to back up Reed's question on the division of labour.
Just, I'll come back to it in a moment.
Sorry.
Promise. I haven't taken it off the table. I was just going to make sure we had some views. But thanks.
Sorry, no, very quickly. Sorry, Mark, for not addressing your question. I'm not sure that we have much information about it. So I find what Philippe says, it still is a mystery to me, the link between these mirror trials and how much they have influenced the strategy in Ukraine. The fear of Ukrainian authorities using trials, as part of their, legitimate defense, and realizing that it could backfire because the Russians were planning to organize their own trials, which of course would be, show trials, but and then all of a sudden the whole Mariupol case collapsed because of an exchange of prisoners. They had the commanders of Azov, they were preparing the courtroom in Mariupol, and all of a sudden they changed them against a friend of Putin. And the whole case collapsed, and we never heard about it, and Azov combatants are still being exchanged these days. So obviously something changed, and the threat of these mirror trials seemed to disappear. And at the same time, it also seemed that exchange of prisoners was the priority, and that the number of trials against Russian soldiers in Ukraine remained extremely small, and against very small soldiers. And so I think there was always that question, like, does it influence the strategy by Ukrainian judicial authorities? Like, are they trying to, hold it on national trials against Russian soldiers, not to trigger a massive amount of trials of their own Ukrainian soldiers by the Russian judiciary? It still is a mystery to me, and I think it still is a pretty legitimate point to make, but we don't know, and I still don't know the exact answer, but I think it's really worth keeping that in mind, because yeah, it's lawfare on both sides, or it was at some point.
And on the ICC, a question from Reed. Do we know, Anna, about what cooperation there is?
Yeah, let me try. So from what we know, there is cooperation in the sense that there is the exchange of information about who is doing what between the national system and the ICC. I don't have an answer to what the ICC is doing exactly in Ukraine, or how many people they have on the ground or so, but I think fair to say that there is an attempt to coordinate efforts, and that the ICC, from what we know, requested some information from the national authorities, suggesting that they don't want to duplicate efforts. And yeah, the short answer is we don't know what's happening exactly, but something is being done.
Well, can I follow that up? Maybe Thierry wants to as well, but just that we have the ICC, but we also have the Joint Investigative Team, which is the ICC plus others, including Ukraine, plus we have what's going on in Ukraine. Any idea of how that combination works?
Let me be critical here. I don't think it works very well. I think international and foreign support could have been better, or at least better coordinated. As regards JIT specifically, I know there is a talk of things that JIT is doing, but judging
joint investigation teams, right?
Yeah, sorry. Judging from the fact that it's usually general things like there was a meeting of JIT and something was decided and then there are never any details, I'm assuming that they're not doing much. And certainly we haven't seen any reports of completed investigations or even investigations in progress at last stages, or actually any significant steps that could signal that investigations are really being done. So I think it's more of an expression of willingness to do the work, but not necessarily the work in progress as it should be by now.
Did you want to add something, Thierry, or no? No? Okay. Some more questions from the room? Yeah, Carolyn. Excuse me.
Thanks. If I can, it was a question provoked by something that I heard from Iryna, actually, about related to access to the courtrooms, but the question goes off into left field, as mine often do. I'd like to know, both from Iryna and Anna, thinking about the nature of the crimes that are going to be coming before Ukrainian courts, particularly sexual violence crimes, and the trials of the collaborators, alleged collaborators, pardon me, if you think that the existing protective measures regimes in the country are up to the challenge. Because on the one hand, sexual violence is incredibly stigmatized in the country. And I'm also thinking about the families and loved ones of the alleged collaborators who could be facing very serious security risks. Is there a need for some kind of reform in this area?
So protective measures both potentially for victims and for the families of alleged perpetrators. Exactly. Okay. And any more questions? Yeah. Come over to you.
Hi, my name is James Patrick Sexton from the Asser Institute. I had a question related to the exchange of prisoners of war. So we've discussed that a lot tonight. And I was wondering whether there's any frustration on the side of the prosecutors and investigators in Ukraine about the exchange of potential Russian war criminals, whether there's any dialogue between the decision makers and the judicial authorities, or whether it's kind of a shared perception in Ukrainian society that, yeah, the exchange of prisoners of war comes higher than the prosecution. Thank you.
Okay. Any more moments? Okay. Oh, yeah, we have another one. Sorry, I'll go here first.
Hi, my name is Margherita Capacci, and thank you for the panel. I wanted to ask something connected to transitional justice, but more on the side of victims, and if you had the chance to talk on victims on the ground and how they are reacting to these trials, if they find some relief or if they're asking for more, what they're asking for, how they're discussing them. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so 3 questions. What are victims actually asking for? Protective measures for people, and I've forgotten your question in the middle, but I'm sure they've remembered it. So please go ahead.
Okay, I would try to answer. As usually I have this opportunity to meet victims in the courts and to ask them about the reaction to the justice, their attitude, and what do they prefer. In fact, I think that Ukrainian courts, they have some mechanism to organize the protection, of course. we still have such practice even before this big war, when we had some secret witnesses. The person could speak from another room with hidden face. The voice is changed, the name is changed, and nobody knows, except the court, nobody knows who is that person. So I think it's also be used now if there is such a will, but the prosecutor should decide, the witness or victim should ask for this, and so the court also analyze the situation, so they should decide this. Also, sometimes I have such a situation when the accused person, for example, it's a woman, she lived in the occupied village, and she gave food to Russians and supported them somehow. And she was accused in collaboration, and now she's in prison. She's arrested, and the hearing is in process. And when she saw that I'm in the courtroom, and I'm a journalist, and she told the court, I wouldn't be happy that everybody would knew that I am accused and I'm under arrest. But at the same time, there were no other reasons to close the court, to close the session from the public, because we have some rules when we close the session for the public if there are some very sensitive questions. It's about sexual violence, it's about something that is very painful for the person, very private. But that wasn't that case. And so, but at the same time, we have some personal information. And we have also such a rule in our law that we can name the person only if we have the verdict that is approved, that this person is really guilty. It's approved by the court. And before this verdict, we can't name the person, that this person is in the court and is being tried. Of course, there are some cases that are very public and very, for example, as Shishimarin. Shishimarin was not tried in one day. It lasted for nearly 2 weeks in general. And of course, there wasn't one article about Shishimarin, and everybody were talking, discussing before the verdict about Shishimarin, because this is was very public case. But in many other cases, we understand that these people are just small people, and and so the judge decided that I can cover this case about this woman that gave food to Russians, but the judge told me that I shouldn't name this woman, just without her name and without her face, without photo. Yes. So in other case, there was such a situation when the woman was a victim. It was in absentia case, so we don't have accused in the court, but there was a victim, and it was our attention was mostly around that victim, and it was also sensitive because this woman was arrested by Russians, and she was kept on the ground for a couple of days with bad conditions. And it was painful for her to testify, to tell all this dramatic situation. And it was also interesting because except of her own drama, her daughter was also stolen by Russians. She was arrested by Russians in the early spring, and for a couple of months her daughter was in prison in Russia. And that time, at the beginning of spring, just after the occupation of the territory, this woman was on TV. She was talking about that my daughter was stolen by Russians, and she was open talking. Then her daughter was free. Now she's in Ukraine. And now we have another trial just about this woman, about her arrest by Russians. during the occupation, and that woman told, I changed my mind, and now I don't want to have photo. So we can publish my testimonies, but without my photo. So it's nearly half a year from the first interview and now. So, and of course, this is her right. So I think we should just, if you're a journalist, you should just go to that person and ask, do you agree that I make a photo? And do you agree about name and so on? Because it's important to them. It's about, and also we have trials about sexual crimes. We have still, it seems to me that we have verdicts in 2 trials. Both trials were closed. They were in absentia. And it was also such a specific that the victims were children, girls that were minor. They were just 16, 15 years old. So, yes, and I attended one of this court. I was just behind the door waiting for the prosecutor and waiting for the lawyers and waiting for the brother of the victim. He was a witness. Yes, the people were talking behind the courtroom. And we know that the girl that was a victim, she didn't testify. She testified, but not in the court. We have such an amendment, such a changement in our law that now during the war, the investigators are allowed to film the testimonies. When you first meet the victim, you made this film or video recording, and then you just, the court just watch this record without testimonies. And so just not to make not to repeat the same to that child again. So there are some, of course, there are something that is done to protect these people, to help them.
Yeah, very quickly. Witness protection system is terrible. The law on witness protection is as old as I am, which is 30 years old. And there is no budget for witness protection. And what Iryna said is all true, of course, but it only applies to the court hearings. Witness protection measures like the ICC has or many other countries, they're all in the law, but there is no budget to implement them. There is no system like witness support unit or victim support unit that would be in charge of implementing these measures. It's up to the relevant investigative agencies, and they cannot. Well, I mean, they do deal with witness protection when they're requested to, but this is so far from normal situation that the urgent reform of witness protection is needed in Ukraine, and international support, I think, is really needed in this sense to create a strong victim and witness protection and support unit that would be functioning right now or in the next few months. And just very quickly about prisoner swaps. Yes, this was a problem in the early days of war, but I think as of this summer, measures were introduced so that no prisoners are swapped unless the prosecution signs off. i.e. they can see the list of who is being swapped or will be, and they can see whether these people are suspected of war crimes, and if so, they might disagree, and then there is coordination with the relevant ministries.
Do you have any insight into any views of victims as the result of different cases? I mean, have you got any insights into the views of victims after cases? Are they feeling satisfied, or do they want something different or something new, or any insights?
I think Iryna is better placed to answer this.
I decided to make such an such a rule for myself in this case of in absentia trials. If there is an opportunity after the trial to ask the victim, are you satisfied? And how do you, what is your attitude to this process? And most of people, they are just ordinary people, and they say that yes, they are a little bit confused by all this. They say that it seems to them it shouldn't be as it organized, that it's not the proper way, it's not the better way for them. But I also see that it's important for them to tell this somewhere, their story, officially to tell it somewhere. And also they feel like skeptical. They don't believe that these accused people, that they would be arrested sometimes in future. They don't believe in this. So it's like more symbolic for them. But they are not. I can't say that they are very criticizing this. I think they are happy that it's the end for them, and they are alive, and it's okay now.
Do you want to add anything, Thierry?
No, I think I would just want to insist on that question about frustration, because I have a bit of the same thing, and I'm not sure that it's completely clear to me what you're saying there. It's a big deal. Like the exchange of prisoners did have an impact on the potential war crimes trials and who was tried. The commanders got away with it. Did you feel there was frustration about it, or do you feel there is still some frustration within the judiciary? You asked, but I would also expand like among, within the communities, or is it agreed upon? Is there a sort of acceptance that we'd better have our men back and too bad for justice?
Anna?
Yeah, I think the fact that eventually there was a system introduced wherein the prosecution signs off before the swap means that there was some frustration. Not that I know the exact level of it, or I've heard the views of prosecutors directly, but I'm just assuming. As regards within communities, I think it's a fairly common view that prisoner swaps are not a bad thing, in the sense that it allows to bring back Ukrainian soldiers, which is what really important, because these people need to be brought back. It should be made very clear that Ukraine as a state and the Ukrainian society support the exchanges insofar as these exchanges allow Ukrainian soldiers to come home, and if they choose so, to continue fighting.
Small thing. I think that I have such an impression that when we have a trial, and if the soldier is in the courtroom, that nobody have such a dream or illusion that that soldier would be in prison really. Now, we expect that most of them would be exchanged. And I think now we don't have such a 100% sure that all Russians are exchanged. But we believe that if we had 6 soldiers, I think I'm totally sure they would be exchanged all, if they are don't exchanged now. And even we have some war-related trials from about combatants from Donetsk and Luhansk Republic. They are also tried, and we also understand that we have a very big hope that we would exchange them. So, and even these trials, they are so short and rather formal sometimes, because everybody wants to make it faster, because there is some special attitude to these courts, because it is justice for exchangement, to exchange these people to our soldiers.
I'm going to ask for a last round of questions. Milena, and then back to Philippe and Marlies.
Hi, I'm Milan Dimitri, a defense counsel at the ICC. I heard you talk about the pressure on the judiciary and the lack of adequate protective measures. Do you think it's possible, and from what you saw and observed, to have a meaningful defense for a defense lawyer? Do you think that they have the possibility to present effective defense? And when you think about protective measures, I can very well imagine the fear of a potential defense witness who says, I don't want to go there and testify, the pressure of the community, the pressure of the neighbors. So I wanted to hear your views on that.
And Philippe?
Thank you. Yeah, zooming out of Ukraine and maybe considering the role of third-party states, a number of them have announced opening of investigations based either on the principle of universal jurisdiction. I was trying to check on the website of Justice Infonet because they have it all. And other states have also opened up investigations because some of their nationals have been victims of crimes in Ukraine. We've seen the French gendarmerie being present, investigating. How is this dynamic playing out for the Ukrainian authorities? Is that welcomed help? Because anyway, there's too much to be done and the resources are too scarce. Or is it something more subtle at play that we don't really see? Maybe in terms also of cooperation and the sheer number of actors that are there extending maybe a helping hand, but might that be too much for the Ukrainian judiciary?
And Marlies, you wanted to ask.
Thank you. My question actually was asked by someone else in the audience, but I will, since you're kind enough to pass me the microphone, I won't say no. We've heard the word collaboration or collaborators a number of times this evening, and of course that is an immensely complex subject that one can talk about at great lengths. Those of us in Europe remember the number of pages, books, films that have made about collaborations and their motives, justified or unjustified. But I'll keep it really simple. What happened to the woman who gave the bread to the soldier?
Thank you. And I had a question that was given to me by somebody who didn't want to ask it directly themselves. And you mentioned it yourself. You were previously covering trials on corruption issues, particularly. And is there still evidence of corruption amongst public officials in Ukraine? Is corruption still an issue in the way that trials are being conducted? It's a big question. So we have 4 questions to end with. You have the microphone, so effective defense, is it possible?
About defense, yes, we just are investigating somehow the role of defense. And I can say that my impression is not very nice. I'm not very impressed that we have now really strong defense, strong lawyers in these war crime trials, unfortunately. First and foremost, Russian soldiers, they do not have their private lawyers. Even if they are here in Ukraine, arrested, or in absentia, they don't have their private lawyers. Because they don't have will to have a lawyer here. They don't want to participate in this Ukrainian court, and also because it costs some money. You should pay for the lawyer if you want to have your private lawyer. So usually we have a defense from the state. So the lawyer is appointed by the state by such a method of a lottery. So just so there is some list of lawyers that agree to work for state for some payment. And in such a situation when the person does not have money for the lawyer, the state gives him the lawyer. And so Russian soldiers receive their lawyers from the state, and it could be any lawyer without some preparation, without experience, enough experience, and sometimes it could be a funny situation. You know, the lawyer of Shishimarin, it seems to me he was good enough. He wasn't the worst variant. He was prepared somehow, because the last trial I was in Chernigiv region in a small town Bobrovitsa, and then there the lawyer just he was an old man, and somehow more than 60 years old, and he wasn't very active, enthusiastic. He wasn't, there are different people in such age. Some people are really active, and this person, he was like, I think it was time for him to leave his career, but he wanted to get money from the state, and he did not refuse to take part in the court. But the day when we waited him in the court, he did not come. He forgot about the trial. And we waited him also not in the courtroom but on the video stream, but he did not open the computer, and they called him, and he answered, "Oh really? I thought it could be done without me at all. I told that I have no arguments against this, so you can do it without me." And then he was explained that he should participate. Then, of course, he appeared somehow on a video. And after the testimonies of that poor woman that was underground, kept by the Russians, then the judge just asked this lawyer, "What is your opinion?" And he told, I have no arguments against this. I agree, he's really guilty. So let's make the verdict, let's make the justice. In fact, it's not a popular situation. It was a unique situation. It was the first time I heard that the lawyer agrees that his client is guilty. Maybe he just misunderstood his role in that process. Maybe he thought he was a prosecutor there, not a defense. It's funny, but in fact, I think this is not very nice for our trials and our judicial system, because it also makes some compromise for our justice in this time. But it's on the other hand, this does not depend, because it was a lottery that he was chosen. But maybe we should also change something. To organize some courses for the lawyers, to change this system. Maybe we should have some separate list for defense, for these lawyers, for the in these cases, because it's obviously that they should have some preparation, some experience, some education, and that such any person can't be a lawyer in such case.
Would you like to add anything on corruption, having covered corruption cases
about
before?
Corruption? Unfortunately, yes. But in media now, of course, the problems of war and war crimes, they are more, they get more attention. They are more scandal. They more pay attention, and we still have corruption. I think it's a little bit lower. It's lower, but there are still bribes. From time to time I meet this in news that there are still people arrested by corruption, and I also, from time to time, I cover these corruption cases. It exists, still exists.
And Thierry, what about universal jurisdiction? I mean, this is something you've built Justice Info's reputation on. Are you planning to cover?
Really?
Yes, really.
I thought it was much more about the work of Iryna that we built our reputation on. No, because what is there to say on universal jurisdiction cases? It's yeah, we have an announcement by what about 16 maybe countries today that they would open cases. As you know, Philip, there is no prospect at this point that they would have anybody to arrest and try. I mean, unless one of these soldiers come to our countries for some reason. I mean, it looks very unlikely at this moment that there will be any case. So to me, it's an announcement which shows support to the whole process, but I'm not expecting, at this point, I'm not expecting anything to happen at that level. No, it's not where it's happening, and I'm not expecting it to be important on the Ukraine. Yeah, maybe you have a different view, but at this point, I don't see it. I think it's very interesting. There is so much will, so that's part of the unprecedented situation in Ukraine, is that we've never seen so many countries so quickly saying we're ready to use universal jurisdiction and to do our own part of the work. But I don't really see that this is where it's going to happen.
And Iryna, before I ask you to hand over to Anna, do you have anything for Marlies on the lady with the loaf of bread?
Actually, we don't have verdict now. It's still in process.
Okay.
But I have another. But if it's about collaboration, in fact, this is a new crime in Ukraine, in Ukrainian criminal code. We did not have such a crime before March before the March this year. And now this article, it's really big and complicated, and it unites many different cases, very different, beginning from just public speech somewhere on the street when you're told that Russians are good, they are doing right things, then writing something in social media and even put a like somewhere as a reaction. It also could be qualified as collaboration. It sounds strange, but we have such cases when people had verdicts. They were not punished very severe, but they recognized guilty, but we have such cases, a lot of cases, and most cases about collaboration, it's about some public speech somewhere on the streets, some public people were talking public, yes, and also it's when people agree to work in occupation administration, when they are given when they give some resources, some, transport, buildings to the army. So when they agree to work in the occupation police and so on. So a great list of different things that differ one from another. It's all about collaboration. By the way, I have one case that I covered. It was about a man who lived in the occupied village, and he just told to the Russians that his neighbor was in territorial defense before the village was occupied. So, and a couple of people from the village were arrested by Russians because that man told this information, and these people could be killed because he uncovered them. But they were not, they succeed to survive. But that man who showed their neighbors, he was tried, and he is sentenced to 15 years in prison now. Yes. I think that he would not be exchanged, because who is interested in him? He's not combatant, he's not interesting as a soldier, he wouldn't be used in Russian army. And but there are also some possibilities that maybe in a few years after there would be, we have such rules when the person in prison has a nice attitude. Maybe it would be made lower a little bit. But this is a case, and his position was that yes, he was scared. He told, "I decided to help Russian because I was so scared. I saw that they were shooting, that they threatened to kill someone, and I was so scared too that I decided to cooperate with them." But the court did not believe him. The judge decided that he had the choice, that it wasn't so dangerous to him, because there were many people in the village and nobody was scared more than he. He was the most scared. So now he's recognized guilty. Maybe there would be an appeal. I haven't received such information yet, but maybe it would be interesting if there would be some appeal.
Great. And Anna, there's a number of questions still on the table. So there's still, is it possible to have defense, fair defense? Maybe there are some other programs involved supporting defense lawyers and giving them training.
Yes, in fact, there are. Let me just get back to something Iryna said. I agree that defense lawyers are not trained in war crimes or international crimes generally, but this is not exactly an unequal situation because prosecutors are also not trained in, or not well trained in war crimes or international crimes. The entire justice system is learning on the job. So it's as prosecution started learning it in 2014 in this specific regions, in the same way the defense started learning it when the necessity arose. And yeah, to that end, it's necessary, of course, to have all these capacity building programs and trainings and so on, but it's being done, and hopefully it will be done more and for more people. But yes, the lack of witness protection is quite significant, and it affects, I wouldn't say it affects all trials that are happening in relation to war crimes, but in some specific instances you can see even investigators and prosecutors complaining, not just the defense lawyers. So in that regard, yes, the reform is needed, and it would be really good to have something.
And do you see any welcome or appetite for universal jurisdiction cases? Is that something Ukrainians are thinking about, or it's really that's later down the line?
I think an average Ukrainian does not really know what universal jurisdiction is. Not to say that an average Ukrainian is stupid, it's just not something that's on the news as much as the domestic trials are, so to say. I think, broadly speaking, there is an appetite, certainly in the sense that justice actors hope that universal jurisdiction may help where the national efforts are not productive, so where the national system does not have access to perpetrators and suspects. So yes, there are hopes in there, but I think there was a broader question about the coordination of international efforts in Ukraine. Just a quick note on that. I think as long as these efforts come with an understanding that Ukraine is not a failed state in the sense that its justice system, A, exists, and B, functions, and C, functions fairly well under the circumstances. If the help, whichever help that is, understands that and comes with an intention to support the system and not to replace it, or not to be a savior, then I think it's a really good and coordinated effort. And of course, Ukraine, I think, is very open to receiving this help. But if it's 1 or 2 weeks parachuting of experts randomly here and there in that case and this case, and these experts would live in very short time and never be seen again or be seen again in 2 years' time, then I don't think that's exactly what Ukraine needs.
Well, I'm sure you still have some more questions to put, but maybe as we repair to the bar afterwards, I'm sure also you'd like to join me in thanking our guests who came tonight, because I found this a really insightful discussion. I hope that you found it as well. So let's say thanks. That's it, you're released.
And thank you all for coming, and thank you, Janet, for moderating. It's a privilege. And really, Anna and Iryna, thank you for flying to us and be with us and share all this experience. Thank you and have a good evening.